Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the business connection, a leading Brazil business podcast talking about business in the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American living in Brazil, known for business networking and talking from my podcast studio in Campinas, São Paulo, Brazil. Today's guest is Steve Scheibe, and he's talking with us from San Diego, California. Steve Scheibe is Managing Director of All Abroad Consulting. He's also professor at the National University in San Diego, where he teaches international business courses. He's also a volunteer mentor at InovAtiva Brasil, which is involved in mentoring Brazilian startups seeking to grow business activities in North America. Steve has lived in Brazil, and he knows it well, and we've had a chance to meet here in Campinas at business events, and where he is on the International Board of Advisors for Hope Unlimited Cidade dos Meninos here in Campinas. Steve has also been a previous guest here on the podcast. So with that, Steve, I want to welcome you again to Talk to Brazil Business Connection.
Tom, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be back with you again. And I'm looking forward to traveling and meeting with you personally, hopefully again this year. And really excited to have the opportunity to make any comments and dialogue back and forth with you on the program about business and activities in Brazil.
And Steve, for our listeners, since we have met and we've been and obviously keep an ongoing networking activities open, so I follow you, you follow me, see what you're talking about, what you're doing. And we've been back and forth with our mutual views of the same thing, which is Brazil, and also which is business development outside of Brazil for Brazilians. So I think that's been our crossing point for a long time. And with that, every year you seem to make your forecast regarding Brazil. And keeping with this tradition, you recently published on the allabroadconsulting.wordpress.com your 11 predictions for Brazil 2021. What I'd like you to do is go through and mention the 11, and then we'll come back and talk about some reflection later, okay?
Great, Tom. That's fantastic. I'd love to go through the 11 predictions, and just also note that the 11 predictions is kind of a short form of another blog published on the same day, also on the All Abroad Consulting WordPress.com site. There's a longer form text of I think the title of that is More of the Same in Brazil 2021.
Right.
But let me go through the 11 predictions and get through those and see if we can come back and make comments on these and maybe beyond.
Right.
Starting with the first one, I said, well, there's a lot of talk in Brazil, as everybody knows, about Bolsonaro being impeached. And there have been the manifestations, public manifestations, cars driving along and everybody honking their horns and people saying, impeach Bolsonaro, blah, 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 and drive in that direction. But my prediction is that Bolsonaro will not be impeached or leave office this year. The second prediction is that Brazil continues to have a hard time with COVID and the COVID pandemic. Mm-hmm. And it's very, very difficult to get grips on that. And the person that would be most responsible is the Minister of Health, General Pazuello. And my prediction is that Pazuello has not done an adequate job, and that Bolsonaro will sacrifice the general in the health ministry before he has to take too much heat himself. So I'm predicting that Pazuello will leave the health industry probably in the next couple of months or maybe even sooner. Mm-hmm. The third prediction is that the Brazilian economy will not grow more than 1%. And that's basically the population is still growing a little less than 2%. So basically Brazil's becoming more impoverished. It's not growing on a per capita basis, and that's a major concern. There will be some rebound in the economy. The minister, Paulo Guedes, had predicted that Brazil would bounce back in a V-shaped recovery, but that depends on a lot of factors that he personally has not gotten control of.
Mm-hmm.
So the economy, I don't predict any significant growth for the economy. That leads into the unemployment. Unemployment is quite high, millions and millions of people unemployed, and those are added to the people that are in the informal sector and sub or underemployment. And so right now the official statistic is that unemployment in Brazil is at 13.3%, and likely it's going to go higher, 15, 16%. And that reminds me of back in the 80s when we had hyperinflation and unemployment ranged between 12 and 20%.
Right.
In the late 80s. So we're back in a significant period of difficulties. One thing that the fifth prediction has to do with inflation, and inflation in Brazil it's marvelous in the sense that for us older people in Brazil, we lived through periods of high inflation and then higher inflation and then hyperinflation,
right,
where inflation was running at 100%, 200% per month,
right,
and and that was very difficult period. And then we got a grip on inflation with the Plano Real in the mid 90s, and we've had a fairly stable currency since then and fairly low inflation rates. And so we have inflation rates today that are low, but they're ticking up. And so I'm predicting inflation will go up to 5% and maybe higher.
Mm-hmm.
And that the central bank's basic interest rate, which is currently at 2%, will probably double by the end of the year up to 4%, which has serious implications for Brazil's internal debt, right, and the payment on the internal debt. The next one has to deal with Brazil's foreign minister, Mr. Araujo, and I'm predicting that he'll be removed from the foreign ministry as mainly due to his general lack of popularity among many sectors in Brazil, and also because the Biden administration will probably not look at him very favorably, and so I think that that Bolsonaro will likely end up sacrificing Araujo and coming up with someone that is more tractable and more amenable to the climate crisis, to the Paris Agreement, mm-hmm, and to looking at globalization and China and international opportunities in a manner which is in less conflict or less contradictory to most of the business people and most of the diplomatic corps in the rest of the world.
Right.
Basically, Araujo is totally out of sync with the consensus of the moment. Mm-hmm. So, given that lack of sync, I think that he'll be removed. One of the big deals is it's curious because we have the European Union, South American Free Trade Zone, Mercosur agreement, which a long time ago Araujo was instrumental in negotiating, and but because of the continued environmental issues in Brazil with the fires in the Amazon region and the fire last year in Mato Grosso and the Pantanal,
right,
the Brazilian wetlands, there's a lot of pressure in Europe, which in a way is self-serving as well, but it definitely finds a justification in Brazil's mm-hmm. climate crisis. So I don't think that the EU-Mercosur agreement will be approved, and that will hurt Brazil's exports to Europe. Mm-hmm. Another curious thing is that Brazil traditionally over the past decade has typically attracted every year between 70 and $80 billion of direct foreign investment. Companies coming into Brazil and setting up greenfield investments, investing in new industries, new production, new plants, and buying land and whatever. But since last year, foreign investment in Brazil has fallen significantly. So I think that this year we're looking at less than 50 billion in FDI, and that's significant because Brazil does not have an internal savings that is necessary for investments. And so if you don't have internal savings and you don't have external investments, you don't have any investments, and without investments, you don't grow.
Right.
So that's tough. Violence has always been an issue in Brazil, and it's interesting that under the Bolsonaro administration, even with the flexibilization of acquiring arms and armaments and everything, the homicide rates have fallen, which is wonderful, which is great. I mean, gone from 65,000 homicides a year to somewhere around 50,000, I believe, at this point, which is a significant reduction. Right. But at the same time, police violence has increased very significantly. Right. So the police are killing more and more people. So, and that's serious because if you're, who do you call when you need them? Do you call the police or do you call somebody else?
Right.
It's a problem in Brazil. Do you call the police or do you call the guy on the corner who has the gun? The other thing is that the Brazilian Bolsonaro and Araujo and the Brazilian economics ministry has talked about joining the OECD for many years, all during the Bolsonaro administration. And it's been the United States was supposed to help, but the help never materialized. And Brazil has never met the requirements, and it doesn't look like the requirements are going to be met. And one of those things is transparency in national accounts. Right. And Bolsonaro put Paulo Guedes in charge of the Brazilian economy, and he was his safeguard with the business sector and business interests. But almost all of his initiatives have been blocked or have not prospered or have not gone anywhere in the Brazilian Congress, and so things have not moved forward. And without greater transparency, the membership in the OECD is not likely. And then we have a spending ceiling in Brazil, which has been important for controlling inflation and keeping a handle on public spending, and that ceiling has been very close to being breached, and it has been with the pandemic has actually been breached unofficially because of the emergency nature of the pandemic. But it may be that this year the ceiling will be breached, although the economics ministry will likely deny it all along, saying that it will not be transparent. And overall, Brazil will continue to fall behind. We look at it's amazing. We look at Argentina 100 years ago, and Argentina was at a level of development comparable to the United States. And the United States in 1920 and Argentina in 1920 were kind of similar, in terms of income per capita and that sort of thing. And Argentina has declined for in relative terms for a century. And we're hopeful that the same thing does not happen to Brazil. But Brazil definitely is still falling behind in education, technology, science. And there's a major desire that people want to leave. Everyone that has a chance is trying to find a job abroad, and there's a definite brain drain of Brazil's best and most desirable people in terms of education, which Brazil has provided them, and they're taking those resources and that education abroad and using that elsewhere. I don't look at that as totally bad, because most Brazilians still have a tremendous love for Brazil,
right?
And they want Brazil to develop, and they want to participate in the development of Brazil. And so they'll come to the United States, or they'll go to Europe, or they'll go to Asia, Singapore, China, wherever, and they'll learn and take skills back. But Brazil has to be receptive and has to create an environment where it makes sense to come back in economic terms. And we saw, I remember back in 2010 when Brazil was taking advantage of the commodity boom and received the nomination for the Olympics and the World Cup, and everybody was excited, and all the Brazilians were going to return, and everything was hunky-dory. And then all of a sudden, in 2013, things started to decline again. So hopefully that sometime in the future this decline can be reversed, and people will come back and we'll get a grip again. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge. It can happen, but it's a challenge.
Well,
so anyhow,
I want to agree with you, because the points that you've made in the 11 predictions, and for our audience, those are the points that historically have been the headlines. All right. And as you know from your time here, for me and other persons, this is the way it is. And I can see, as you have written, of saying more of the same. From that side, it's more of the same. But at the same time that we're saying that, and you're making your predictions, there is business. There are things happening in Brazil. What I have seen, an influx, actually, of different types of companies. What we do have to mention here, one of the strong points in the development of Brazil for the last years, and I can see that continuing, is the agriculture. We're talking about commodities, where in the past it was strong around minerals, and we're talking about iron ore and other. But today, agriculture has permeated itself throughout the country. It has been the attractive point for international investment. So there is still a lot of investment coming. It's just different from the past. It is less. I agree with you that it may be less than 50 billion. But we've read recently in the headlines that actually China has surpassed even the United States in FDI. And the Chinese have great interest in Brazil for a number of reasons. It's not only agriculture. Chinese have been investing here for a long time in terms of power generation, obviously in agriculture and other types of business, communication. So there are avenues of growth. They may not, and they probably aren't the same as the past. But I think the important points that you did mention, it will be a politically, this year politically will be an up and down as it always been. But from businesses that are having success, they will continue to have success. Because on the same thing, it's when you say, is the glass half full or half empty? Recently, no, and when you read the headlines here, and when you talk to people, sometimes people think, well, you don't really know what you're talking about. But in the morning, we can hear that the Ford Motor Company is shutting down operations and spending $4 billion and leaving the country. And then in the afternoon, you hear the president of Volkswagen in Brazil saying that he's planning a 12% increase in the market. So we have to, and we're saying that, and I'm saying that really to our international audience. You really have to take a look, and you have to realize there is a glass, and there is water in the glass. And so that's good and bad from both sides. So it's really what type of water do you want in that glass?
No, I really agree with you, Tom. I think that we have a country that continentally is the fifth largest country in geography in the world. has 210 million people. We're talking continental proportions, and we have an economy that used to be $2 trillion, 2.2 trillion at one point. Is less than that now, but it still makes Brazil in the top 10 or top 12 economies in the world. And so there's tremendous opportunity. There are all sorts of, although industry generally may be declining, there are sectors in industry that are growing. I mean, Crown, which is a company that makes aluminum cans and is expanding and putting in 2 or 3 new plants and spending $200 million in making cans for the beverage sector.
Right.
So we're going to have growth in paper and pulp and packaging and aluminum and many companies that are already present, Brazilian companies already present in the United States in terms of direct investment, will continue to export. And that will happen in the steel industry. You have Gerdau, the Brazilian steel company, exporting to the United States, a very significant player. Mm-hmm. You have WEG, W-E-G, based in Santa Catarina, which makes electric motors, and they're very big and growing in the
global player,
in the green energy, in the green energy sector. And so there's lots of opportunity. I know that paradoxically, and I think you've seen this as well, that we continue to have people coming to us and saying, Steve, we want to invest in Brazil.
Right.
How do we do it? What's going to happen? Does Brazil have a structure and an economy that will allow not overall, but that allow my company specifically to do something and to prosper.
Right.
And each company is unique. Each situation is unique. You may look at someone and say, hey, no, the best thing would be, let people come and buy from you in the United States. But, if you want to invest in Brazil and you have the adequate market and you've done the homework and the research and you've made the investment to gain knowledge, then Brazil has tremendous widespread opportunities. Right. And as you mentioned, agriculture today, there's been a tremendous flow and a tremendous interest of farmers in the United States in the Midwest who for years and years have planted soybeans or corn or similar products. And they have said, hey, I sold the family farm. I've got a couple $1 million from the sale of the farm, and I'm going to Brazil.
Right.
And,
well, Brazil is, for our audience, I think one of the only or few places in the whole world that can have 3 harvests in a year. That's unheard of. So when you tell them you plant continually, you can have different harvests, different grains. So really you're working year round, you're producing, you're selling, you're whatever. So those are the points and need to be seen. And I think the involvement, the development in different areas, startups. We have any number of unicorns that have started basically from very low level startup companies, and now they've reached the $1 billion mark here.
No, that's true, and the internet commerce in Brazil is growing by leaps and bounds.
Right,
and that's another area. And there are lots of Brazilians who are very smart, very well trained, and very well informed, and very creative, who are creating these businesses, and some of them, as you point out, have turned into the unicorns.
Right.
And one of the things that that Brazil needs to do is to continue to create and enhance the environment that allows these companies to be successful. And that sometimes we have to separate that out from all of the turbulence that we see on the surface of the ocean. Mm-hmm. But when we go down, under the surface, things are a little bit calmer, a little smoother, and people are getting up and working and producing and creating and having ideas and putting those ideas into practice every day.
That's true. And, over the last several years, everybody's talking about disruption, right? Disruptive societies, disruptive this, disruptive that. Brazil's always been disruptive. And it's been learning as you go. If we take the point that you mentioned, inflation. And through that of high hyperinflation that we lived through here, that was the beginning of some fintech ideas years ago. The banking system modernized itself before the rest of the world even knew that it needed to.
That is so true. I remember having that experience.
Health and education, technology. So there are companies coming. Many multinational companies have come here. They are investing heavily in the educational system. The health system, the same thing. There's a lot of consolidation happening in health and service industry, insurance. There are things that, it's coming of time. And when you melt all that together with technology, that's where you see a whole lot of things happening.
Well, and Brazil has traditionally been very strong in the health sector. Brazil's public health sector, in spite of many obstacles, has been very successful and very well developed. And Brazil has been very successful at controlling or eradicating diseases such as malaria and Chagas disease and Zika and different viral.
Dengue,
Brazil was an example in combating AIDS and was positively seen worldwide. And right now we're in a political section, but Brazil has the people and has the technical competence of recovering very quickly if we can isolate or see a little bit beyond all of the political turbulence.
Well, that's my suggestion to people who ask for advice, is that to isolate yourself a little bit from the turbulence, and really it's nose to the grindstone, and look at really what's happening and see the good examples. You've been here to the Campinas region. You can see this is a world-class city. It's a world-class region, world-class airport that serves 110 different destinations. So. Highway infrastructure system, and things are vibrant. Things are happening. So.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much wealth and so much knowledge and so much skill in Brazil, and specifically in your region, in Campinas, São Paulo, in the 200-kilometer circumference around there. That it's a world to itself in a way,
right?
And that if you're a business person and you're looking for opportunity, you can certainly find the opportunity. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
That's a good place to start, right?
It's a wonderful place to start. Yeah. Well,
very good. Well, Steve, I want to thank you. We're coming to the end of our time, unfortunately, but you've left us with a whole laundry list of things to do and come back and talking about, because I think what we will be doing this year is not wait a whole year to see if the predictions were how close you were to them. So what I do want to ask you that you come back and visit these over the course of the year and make those adjustments, okay?
I would love to do that, and it's always a pleasure speaking with you, Tom, and speaking on your program. And you certainly are the king of networking there in Brazil, especially for the international business community. And I'm always honored and pleased to have the opportunity to speak with you, and hopefully that bring a little bit of knowledge, and whatever is wrong, we seek to make the corrections and take any remedial actions that we can.
Well, and that's where your advice and your understanding and experience that you've had is obviously increasingly valuable over time, because some of the things that we're seeing, you and I, we've seen it before. And we've also seen that it can be better. And I think you, as I am, we're both believers that future's still out there to be had.
I agree with you totally.
So stay well, stay home, and we'll be in touch in the future. Okay, Steve?
Very good, Tom, and good luck there in Brazil, and hopefully the vaccinations are on the way to you people, and that we'll get a handle on this pandemic, and things will begin to improve this year, and we'll have a little more insights into where we're headed.
I'm sure it will, okay?
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing your time with our listeners. And for our listeners, you can find more about Steve Scheibe, and that's Steve. His last name is Scheibe, You'll find him on LinkedIn and also on his site, which is allabroadconsulting.wordpress.com. Again, allabroadconsulting as altogether.wordpress.com. I'd like to thank our audience and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research in the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their site, focusmi.com. Visit our website, talktobrazil.com, and find our previous shows, which are also available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and many more. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.